All right, everyone, welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Stubler from LaSalle PD in Illinois. Has been in the law enforcement profession for 26 years. Leadership and wellness are two topics that are important to him, and I'm really looking forward to having him on today's show. So welcome to the show, Chief Stubler. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm looking forward to it. So, give us a little bit of background. I know that you've been in this profession for 26 years. Give us a little bit of insight into the why, the what, and the how.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in a family business actually, and was dabbling my toes whether I'm going to continue on the family business, which was a bowling alley, bowling center, comedy club, and it was my daycare center. Growing up as a kid, like that's where you went. And didn't have a babysitter. Dad was going to watch you at the bowling alley, and he put me to work. And as time went on, I realized maybe not necessarily the thing I wanted to do, but then found an appetite for law enforcement and did a ride along one day and got to experience that in a small city here near LaSalle. And I said, I can't believe they pay you to do this stuff, and this is what I want to do. So that's kind of how it started. And then it led me to become a telecommunicator for a neighboring department here for a couple of years. Went on to become a deputy sheriff for a sheriff's agency for a year, and then went and did most of my career in the western suburbs of Chicago for 21 years there, rising through the ranks to commander before getting the chief's job here in LaSalle.
So, full circle, you grew up in LaSalle, you left for a period of time, and now you're back in your hometown.
I did.
Wow, I love that story. I wanted to ask you, as you were rising through the ranks, did you have any mentors that really helped to shape who you are today?
Oh my God, several of them. And one kind of back from this area here, he actually started up in Mendota, worked for Peru PD, and then he actually became the police chief in the burbs and also became president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. But him and I met when I had worked in the western suburbs in a traffic safety program, and he was one person involved in it. And then a second person was a lieutenant at the time to me. And he's like, hey, you should try this. Help me out with this traffic safety project. I think you'd be good at it. And now that I become good at it, they made me a judge of the program. And then they said, hey, we want you to become co-director of it. And then I eventually got a phone call and said, hey, we want you on the Illinois Chiefs Traffic Committee. And now I'm the chair of the traffic committee. And I'm also sit on the board of directors for the Midwest Center for Traffic Safety. And I actually just got appointed to the Roadway Safety Committee for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, one of 40 people to represent roadway safety for a membership of 30,000 internationally. So traffic safety has been very part, and people have seen my interest in it and how dedicated I am to it. And it's probably for police chiefs one of the top issues, no matter where you work. Where I worked in the suburbs or whether it's in a rural town, the top issue, traffic safety every single time, whether it's e-bikes, speeding cars, running red lights. That's the majority of what citizens want, and that you hear from them is, what traffic safety is important to the residents, no matter where you're at. And I hear that pretty resoundingly through, from my peers throughout the country, that it's the same issue.
Yeah. So it took two people to see something in you, and they're like, hey, kid, I'll put like that in quotes, like, hey, kid, we think that you would be good at this. They believed in you. They helped you along the way. And now here you are, and it's still a passion of yours.
Yes. To this day, I mean, for my entire career, traffic safety has been a portion of it. And, the previous agency I worked in, you could make the statement of, and probably this agency too, no other crime or combination of crimes causes more death, injury, and property damage than car crashes.
Yeah.
Period. There's not enough homicides that happen in the places that I've worked. There's more fatalities from car crashes that actually occur in the jurisdictions that I've worked in than there are homicides.
Wow. How do you think you can create maybe a culture within an organization where people are wanting to mentor each other and people are wanting to look out for each other and help them to reach their full potential? I've had this conversation a few times with, kind of the culture now that people are seeing that it's kind of maybe everyone out for themselves, but how do you create that culture where everyone's looking out for each other?
Well, it's a combination of value plus beliefs equals culture. And when you have that formula and it starts at the top, And when you prioritize that and show, hey, this is what it's about, of tapping the person on the shoulder that you see something in them. I've gotten all I've ever wanted in my career, and now it's my job to pay it forward to the staff that I have here, to say, I don't need any other accolades, awards, or committees or anything like that. I have that experience, and I have some know-how of how to get people into those opportunities to get that kind of experience, to develop their careers and see them grow and take on. After I decide I'm no longer part of law enforcement, it will continue on, but the next person is prepared to sit in this chair and move this agency forward.
And I think that that is so rewarding when you can get to that place where you're like, hey, all I want is to see other people succeed, and I want people to be better than me.
Right.
It's a competitive field, no matter, what profession you're in, it's always going to be competitive. And, I've had this conversation where people are like, yeah, like, we're not looking out for each other because everyone's fighting for the same promotions and everyone's, competition with each other. But it's like, yeah, that might be true. You might all have the same goals, or you might want to promote to be that same role. And maybe there's only one spot available. But I think that two things can be true at once. I think that you can still strive to be the best version of yourself while also supporting other people's success and wanting people to succeed instead of tearing them down or pushing them down. How do we all try to build each other up and still try to be the best versions of ourselves every day?
Absolutely. And you could be the example of that and show others how to do that as well too. And, there's some examples that weren't the greatest. I actually read an email the other day from a retiree. He was a high ranking person in an organization I worked for. And after some self-reflection throughout his career, he had realized that he had mistreated other people and apologized to people he had once worked for. And I guess I'm glad that he recognized that, but he let ego and pride and other things get in the way of his leadership. And, I wanted to be the leader that I never had, be a leader that I never had in my career at some points, and be that person that somebody can go to and look up to and say, hey, I need some advice, or how do I navigate this, versus, tearing somebody down, or being an obstructionist, or get in the way of getting things done and accomplished for the organization and ultimately the residents that we work for.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would love if you could kind of give your definition of what makes a good leader and, what qualities you think that a good leader has to have. But in you talking and kind of explaining what you just did, to me, it seems like it's very selfless. You're trying to make it about the collective rather than yourself. And when people let pride and ego get in the way, that feels very selfish. And so what is your definition of, good leadership? What qualities does a good leader have to have?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to, self-awareness is obviously huge when it comes to this, of what your strengths, what your weaknesses are. But being humble, having a sense of pride, understanding motivation and what makes people motivated to instill good behaviors and work ethic, being that good example for people of what's the right way to do things, and being that model person of what they want to follow, what you want to follow, and being able to back that up with a little bit of storytelling too. And if you can tell a story to some people or share some insight to some things, versus almost like, I don't want to say like regurgitating it from like a textbook, but relating it to practical matters, you can really carry that message and watch it transcend into other people that, it really makes a difference. And
Do
you
you
remember
think?
that stuff. I remember, I think about some of the instructors I had and some of my professional development coursework that I've had throughout my career. And a class I had back in 2019 as part of staff and command that was 8 hours taught by just a guy teaching a block of instruction. And he gave me a PowerPoint presentation slide. And I'm sitting in this office constantly using it. I just recently called him up. I'm like, I'm still using this. And he cracks up. He's like, I can't believe that. But it brings pride to him to know that what he put in his presentation still resonated with me. And then there's some instructors I had for 40 hours. I don't remember a thing they said. And it's not a dismiss at them. It's just the topic wasn't as practical as what just that image that he portrayed to me. When you go through hours of instruction, it's not that I forgot it all, but some of it had a connection with me, and he was able to tie that to it. And when you can personally relate that stuff with people, I think that really helps you as a leader of an organization of how you get something from point A to point B. There's two things cops don't like: change and the way things are. And how do you get them to go to that next thing, or revert back to something, or go forward from something, or make a decision on something? But when you can relate it to things and have some practical examples or put a story behind it, I think storytelling is almost very important, to help carry that message sometimes into the organization.
Yeah, I agree that, it's not always what you present, it's how you present it. That's important. And we've all been there, right? We've all been in presentations or conferences where, maybe the material is really good, but the way that it was presented doesn't hit or doesn't resonate maybe in the way
Right.
that other people. And there's that saying of, people don't remember what you say, it's how you make them feel. And when you can connect those stories, or you can connect to an intrinsic motivator, or you can connect on a human level, maybe you tell your story and someone can relate to you a little bit more, and there's maybe a little bit of vulnerability that goes into it. The how is more important than the what. I think that you can
Right.
present on two of the exact same topics, and you can have one person that doesn't do any of those things, and you can have one person that does all of those things, and more people are going to relate to, I think, the vulnerability and the human connection of a presentation. So I think how we present things is really important. But I also think it's, to your point, it's really important to understand that not everybody is going to resonate in the same way or learn in the same way. And you have to be able to identify within, and that's hard. If it's a group of strangers that you're presenting to, that's hard. But if it's your
Right.
department that you're presenting to, the hope is that maybe your people enough to understand kind of what makes them tick, what motivates them, how they learn, so that you can adjust, the material to them.
And each person is different in how they learn. Some people are visual, some people like hands-on type stuff, and some people like to listen. It's just, you have to learn your people and know who they are and what makes them tick, and what makes them be better employees, or the best employees are capable of doing, how you get maximize uh, their capabilities.
Yeah, 100%. There's something I wanted to kind of highlight that I thought was so cool that you shared with me when we first connected. But you said that when you came back to this department as a new chief, before you walked in those doors, you did something that was really cool. And I want you to be the one to tell the story of what you did walking in as a new chief.
Yeah, so I knew a couple people that worked at the police department, and I said, "Who? Give me a list of all the people who work at the police department. I want to know how many employees we have, how many police officers." And there was names on there I clearly didn't recognize or know who they were, because they're recent or newer hires, and I had been out of the area for some 22 or 23 years, so I didn't stay in direct contact with. And some of the people that work here I went to school with are roughly the same age, so I knew a couple of them, but I didn't know a lot of them. But I asked for a photograph and the name of who each employee was, and they gave that to me after I was offered the job. And I sat down and I studied and looked at all those pictures, and I memorized all those names. And when I came here to the department, the mayor introduced me to the police department. They came here for a department meeting. And as each one of them walked through and congratulated me on being selected as a police chief, as I shook their hands, I called them each by their own name. And several of them to this date say that it was one of the most impressive things, that I took the time to learn who they were, and to put a name to the face meant a lot to them. And that's been one of the more powerful things that they've relayed to me, to say, we knew that you cared about us as a person.
Mhm.
And that was important to them.
I think what you said right there is the most important thing that popped out to me, is that you treated them like people. And when it comes to culture and retention and work product and all of these things, at the end of the day, we're dealing with people, and
Mhm.
people want to feel valued. They want to feel seen and recognized for the hard work that they do. And so I really thought that that was impressive when you told me that. I've never heard that before, but it's something that I think almost every chief can do, right? You can
Yeah.
take the time to know your people. Maybe you don't get one-on-ones with them all the time, but you can know their names and their faces, and that it is something that you can do to make the effort to make sure that people know that you know who they are and that you value them as human beings. And so I really thought that that was cool.
Right. Human capital is our number one asset here is people. Um, and without people, you don't have a police department. So you have to invest into them, not only as employees, but who they are as people, learn about their families and who they are. And when you show a genuine interest in that and show that you care about them, it goes a long way with them.
Yeah, and I would argue that people want to work for an agency where they feel like they're seen and cared for. There's a lot of movement going on right now, and a lot of conversations about retention and recruitment and all the things. But a lot of what we're seeing is people are looking to work for agencies that they feel like care about them. Of course, some people are looking for, maybe money and they're hopping around for, different bonuses, but I think the majority of people really want to land in a place where they're taken care of.
Right. A job fulfillment is huge. And if you don't have fulfillment in the job that you do, I don't care how much you pay me, it's not worth it. So there has to be some value as a human that you bring to an organization. And when you feel like you have that and you have value that you deliver every day, I think it makes the job far more appealing on what you do in and day out.
Yeah, and I think that all ties into wellness. I think that we have to understand what impacts our wellness on a day-to-day basis. And you have to weigh the options of what's worthwhile and what's not, right? And there's a
Mhm.
there was this it was a video that was going around, and it was I thought it was really cool, and I think it relates to this. But a guy walks up to this other guy and he goes, "Hey, if I gave you $10 million right now, would you take it?" And the guy was like, "Yeah, like of course I'd take the $10 million." And he goes, "Okay, but if I told you that by taking the $10 million you would die tomorrow, would you take the $10 million?" And he was like, "Well, no." And he goes, "Yeah, because your life is more important than money. And so when you wake up every day alive, having a sense of gratitude for the opportunity, because it's the most important thing, right?" And so when we think about our lives and our careers, it's the life part. Are we taking care of ourselves? Are we happy? Are we healthy? Do we have meaningful relationships? Are we waking up grateful for the opportunity to be alive? Because that is by far the most important thing. And no amount of money we would ever trade for that, right? We would never take $10 million today to die tomorrow. And so it's this idea of how can we invest more in our life so we have quality.
Right. The the recipe, uh, sleep, diet, and exercise is the recipe to live a long life. And if you're absent one of those three, um, it's going to be shorter than what it probably should be. And unfortunately, being in this job for 26 years, I've been friends with too many and known too many that have barely made it out of the profession to just pass away months after they retire. And that's where the wellness piece comes in. But not only on our physical, mental, but our financial health too. Of like, where do we position ourselves to get us to a point where we can be done or live comfortably without having to deal with more stress and financial stress. It's not left at home. I think if you ask people like what stresses you out the most, the financial piece is probably the top, but one of the most undertrained pieces or accessibilities to what we deal with in law enforcement. Like I think we've really prioritized police suicide, our mental health. That's been a huge priority. We've made tremendous strides at that. We're open to talk about the things that we've seen and how to process and deal with that stuff. And I think many police departments have done their due diligence and done very well at that. And I think we're making tremendous strides compared where we used to be maybe 20 years ago, where you're just not man enough. And I think I dismiss that when people say that stuff. There is no such thing. But we worked in a culture that said that you weren't man enough if you can't deal with it, and that's not the right way to deal with things at all. But the financial piece, fortunately, I had some decent financial guidance when I was younger, but I wish I had even more. Like, why didn't I know about this back then? I wish, if only somebody told me when I first started, Invest, invest, invest. Don't take on wild card payments, consumer debt. Don't go dine out every night. And it's part of your habits. And, everything is subscription based anymore. And I think if people looked at how many subscriptions they paid per month just because it's a monthly fee, they would be alarmed to go, oh my God, that's how much money gets dumped into monthly subscriptions that are on a recurring basis that are just being sucked from your account because it's so easy to do now. And I I look at those and say, which ones do I need and which ones do I want? And there's a difference between those two, and evaluating your needs and wants. And like, hey, we're in spring right now, and this should be a spring cleanup of like what our finances are, what are our financial habits, like what can I do without, or what do I need to clean up a little bit to make sure that I'm in the right space. You look at the markets of like, can you and make financial investments, and now may or may not be the time to buy the dip in the stock market, and that's where you get stocks at discounted prices. And I'm not here to offer financial advice or anything like that, but these are little tips that I wish you knew you could capitalize on returns. But you look historically at like stock market prices from the Great Depression to where we are today, and it's done one thing: only go up constantly. That's the constant. Yes, it goes down. There's occasions where the economy reacts to the markets react to the economy, and there's times where it goes down. But those are discount prices, or basically where you're buying from the clearance rack when it does go down, and when you have that money to put into that. But that's where you have to play. You have to do a total evaluation of your budget, your lifestyle, and what you want and need to be successful. But I mean, if people have financial stress at home, they're bringing it to work.
Yeah.
And you can't live or work a lifetime based upon overtime either. It's not financial. It's not healthy, and financially, it's not feasible because overtime is not a guaranteed part of your wages and benefits. Yes, it can come and go, but then you start talking about you're dipping into your rest and your sleep, which then affects what the recipe I offered earlier: sleep, diet, and exercise. When you take away from those things, then that you start shortening your time span. So early financial investments when you're young. And I just got two guys here recently signed up for a deferred compensation program that they weren't even enrolled in at this point, but now 2-3 years on the job, they've never, now they're starting to do that. And there's been others that in the previous agency I've worked for, they've maxed out and haven't stopped since I pulled their hand. We went to the HR department at 2:30 in the morning to fill out the form, and they've maxed out ever since. And I know at some point, those two guys that have done that will wake up some morning and go to dinner with their wife, spouse, girlfriend, or whatever, and they'll say, that sergeant pulled me in and said, save this money. And they'll have a conversation when I'm buried in a box someday. But it put them in a place where they can be comfortable in life. And knowing that I can help people or guide them to have good financial principles or foundation, it means a lot. Really not police work, but it's good structure. And I think financial structure has to be part of a conversation that we owe our employees and our personnel here who, they're working for us. And I want that stress off their back. And financial stress, I think, is huge for all of us. And things happen in life, whether, albeit divorce, there's a high divorce rate. And, if you position yourself at, very well, you don't have to worry about falling into bankruptcy or debt issues. I've seen people with their homes in foreclosure processes and stuff like that, gambling addictions. So there's habits that we can teach and structure our personnel. And there's now some resources that are starting to come out there about how to position ourselves in a good way to make sure we reduce that burden on that financial stress.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think what you said earlier about having really honest conversations with ourselves and taking the time to dissect our spending habits and understand where the money's going and then where we can put it that's more effective and efficient. And I think it's hard because, and I was this way. It's going to sound really weird that I say that I'm grateful for this, but so I grew up, I had a hard childhood. My mom stole my identity when I was younger, and she racked up like tons of debt on my credit when I was like a kid. and the companies weren't willing to work with me. And so when I was 18, I had terrible credit already, that I wasn't able to get a credit card or anything like that. And so I wasn't allowed to overspend because I couldn't. I had to like really work really hard to build my credit up to then be able to eventually get a credit card and all these things. And part of me is grateful for the fact that I, as a young 18, 19-year-old, because I was living on my own, that I was forced to live below my means. I knew where all the money was going. I couldn't have line of credit at the time. And so everything that I purchased, I could afford because it was all debit, right? And so I learned really early not to live within my means, but to live below my means. Because if something popped up and my car broke down or whatever, I couldn't just toss it on a credit card. I had to have the money in my bank account ready to go. And that has stuck with me throughout my life, but there are still things that I wish I would have known. I wish I would have known about investments. I wish I would have known about stocks and all the things. Like I didn't know anything about it. I was just trying to survive. And I was like, I just know that I can't go into debt and I can't go below, zero. And so that helped me a lot. But I think that having that education early is so important. And it is such a controllable that we can have in our lives to help reduce stress, because there's always going to be stress, but if we can have short-term discomfort, maybe you don't buy the brand new thing now, short-term discomfort, maybe we invest that smarter, and then long-term gain, so that later down the road, you can do those things, and you don't have to feel like you have to work overtime, and you don't feel like you're overextended. And I know that financial wellness is something that's a conversation right now with a lot of agencies across the country. And I think the question kind of comes up of, how can we be more proactive? What does that look like? Is it adding more financial wellness to academies? Is that adding it, more to the organization itself? Is it mandated training? Is it voluntary training? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably not going to be a mandated thing, and I think the as a new cop, the last thing that I thought about was my financial wellness. The last thing I thought about was the financial feasibility of the pension system that is functioned by the city or the state. Like I didn't care about any of that stuff of like, okay, when I'm 85, will this place be able to pay me? Are they making good investments and having good strategies? And now it's like when you get closer to the end, you do look at that stuff more closely and you think about it. But also in just everyday life, it's like you make a good salary, you have good wages, but what do you have to show for it? And it's like some people have absolutely nothing to show for it after they've worked 20 years and made all that money. What'd they do with it?
Mm.
And to put our people in a better place financially, whether it's at home, if it's at home, they're bringing it to work too, and it transcends here into their performance. And I think it's important that we as leaders, we owe that to them. They're for us. Some of us have some wisdom. Like I'm not a financial expert by means, but we can point them into the right directions of benefits that are in certain programs that employers do offer each individual agency. And I just shared one with one of my employees here, and part of the same program that I'm in that has a financial investment benefit that was completely unaware of, and now opened their eyes to that they didn't know about because it wasn't advertised or they didn't pay attention to it. It was like, hey, enroll in this program and it's done. But there's another add-on to that program that you can have some investment strategy there. So now they know about that and they're looking into that. So, I mean, it's just opening our eyes to some different options and features of the benefit packages that each different agency has. So you kind of have to tailor it to that. And I think we'll open their eyes to it, of the importance of it. But some of us who've been around a little while and done well, people listen to that stuff. And, that was another guy. I mean, early on, he's like, hey, invest into this account, invest into doing this. And, time over time, year over year, it just continues to grow and grow and grow. And I'm thankful for that person saying, hey, do this as a young person. They did it for me. So I try to pass it on to them. And, the young people that come in my office and share that experience with them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that awareness is really powerful. At the very least, can we expose people to these concepts? Can we talk about all facets of wellness? Can we show them the resources? Can we lead the way? And then at the end of the day, it's going to be up to them to take action. But if they don't know, they don't know. So
Right.
at the very least, can we at least make sure that everyone knows? What are the resources? How can you take advantage of those things? And then,
Mhm.
if they need additional help with taking action, then they can also reach out. But I think it's almost an obligation to at least have the conversation, because
Absolutely. Yeah.
otherwise, like you said, you're like, man, I wish someone would have told me this 25 years ago, or I wish, I would have known these things. And I would guess that every leader out there, doesn't want to feel like their people are saying that about, the time that they spend with you, that they're like, man, I wish that they would have
Right.
talked about financial wellness. Yeah.
Right.
My,
Agree. I think it's owed to them for sure.
yeah.
Definitely have to have the conversations with them. And now that we start seeing more resources, it's just there's so many cops and very few people who are teaching the structured practices of that. It we we owe them a conversation to what it is. There's another guy who's teaching a class coming up here in beginning of May here in Illinois, and I've shared that with everyone. It's an online thing, no charge to it. So they know it's there, and I've shared my feedback about that instructor and what he teaches and the financial wellness for police officers. So, um, I want them to look at those things and explore those opportunities that are out there to say, hey, I can do some self reflection on my structured budget and how I spend my practices and how do I handle consumer debt. And then how do I handle mortgage payments, car payments, auto loans, and stuff like that, and then investments. And
Yeah.
how do you put yourself in the right position? Is the pension enough? Do I need more? And those are questions that are answered in that presentation that I want them to take a look at and explore to say, hey, maybe I need to do a little bit more for my financial wellness and my well-being here for the years to come. But the investment now will definitely pay off when you're done with this career.
100%. Yeah, and I think that ultimately that's the goal. You mentioned that earlier, that you've known a lot of people who retire and have, a short amount of time on this earth after. And it's how can we have longevity and quality of life at the same time? How can you get to the end of this career and how can you be as happy and healthy and financially stable as you possibly can? And, if you choose to work another career, that's an option. But how can we set you up so maybe it's not something that you absolutely have to do right away? How
Right.
can we set you up so that, you have a nest egg that you can sit on for a little while? Maybe that does take you through the rest of your retirement. What does that look like? And
Right.
I think that we miss that component of the quality. It's like everyone's just like, how can we get to the end? And it's like, yeah, we want you to get to the end, but we also want you to have like life left in you. We want you to be
Right.
able to enjoy the fruits of your labor, physically, mentally, financially, all the things. Like we want you to be as successful as we possibly can. And we want you to have the longest retirement that you possibly can. So, and for me, it's the saddest thing ever to hear that, that you dedicate your entire life to this profession and then 3 or 4 years later, or the statistics show, 3 or 4 years later that that's it. We want you to
Right.
have as long of a retirement as you had in your career, hopefully, and still be
Exactly.
able to enjoy yourself. So I think we have to raise the bar and we have to start talking about quality of life too.
Mhm. Exactly. I mean, it's all encompassing. It can't just be a physical and mental. It's everything that goes in with it because the financial, if the stress is there, it's affecting your mental health as well too.
Yeah,
So I mean, it's all ties into to each other. But the financial piece is an important piece to me, and I think one that can be captured that we can have a big impact on for our personnel.
for sure. My last question for you is for the younger generation who are coming into this career today, what words of wisdom would you share with them?
Oh my God, so much to share with them. Uh, Invest early and invest often, not just financially, but in your growth and development throughout your career. Don't ever let it stop. And I always say it takes three things to do this job: knowledge, tools, and desire. Knowledge and tools generally provided by the organization, the training and the equipment to do the job. The last thing you can never lose is the fire in the belly, the desire. I can't give that to anybody. I can help motivate them, but you have to have the desire, and that comes from within. And you always have to find that way to find the desire of purpose of what you do in this what you do in policing, but also to grow throughout your career. It should never, ever stop. You find a better way to do business, the best way to do business. I'm going to steal a line from Gordon Graham that he teaches in his presentations, but the smartest man or woman in the room is the person who finds the 15th way to hold two pieces of paper together. And you're probably going, creasing your forehead at me right now, going, what did that just mean? But find the 15th way to hold two pieces of paper together. Always look for that 15th way. There's always a better way to do business, and we should self-reflect and do that and look for that 15th way. I'm still looking for the 15th way 26 years later, and we'll still continue to look to the 15th way until I'm done with this profession. But continuous improvement has to be the way you do business, and make constant investments throughout your career and get to explore and network with people outside of your organization as much as you do inside your organization.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and coming on here today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course.